Welcome to All Autism Talk, connecting the autism community one podcast at a time. Our podcast offers friendly conversations with inspiring individuals in the autism community. All Autism Talk is brought to you by Learn Behavioral and the Learn Provider Network. Now, here's your host.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of All Autism Talk, the podcast brought to you by Learn Behavioral, a leading provider in ABA services across the country. I'm your host this week, Richie Plush. During this episode, we're going to discuss a few action items and important steps you can take to make sure that your family is safe. We're going to cover some topics like fire safety and also natural disaster preparedness, and then just some general tips on what to do if you're working with or if you have a family member who is engaging in wandering behavior, and ways you can help prevent that. I hope that you stick with us until the end of this episode. There's some very important topics in here and some great takeaways that hopefully you can utilize in your homes to make sure your families are safe. Our guest this week is Kelly McKinnon-Bermingham, who has been working with individuals with autism and other developmental disabilities for the past 25 years. She has a variety of experiences, but for the purposes of our conversation, it's about the content creation for the September 26th project website. I hope you learn a lot from this episode with Kelly McKinnon-Bermingham. Hi, Kelly. Thank you so much for joining this week. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Richie. Thanks for having me.
So what I really want to talk about is something that I don't think gets enough attention in our field. I really want to talk about safety and safety preparation and all those things that go into being safe before an event happens. But first, I want to dive into it a little bit. What are some considerations for both families and clinicians regarding safety and preparation that you've come across?
Sure. So it's actually an area that I've spent quite a number of years focusing on, at least the last 10 years. I think my original background comes from working in group homes with adults with developmental disabilities. And in Massachusetts, when we were closing down the state institutions there, and safety was such a huge component of the work that we did, that safety sort of always on top of mind for me. And, I've spent a lot of time looking at quality of life indicators, and there aren't a lot of great tools out there. And I've created my own and collaborated with other people and gone back and forth. And what I found is when you talk to families, particularly families that are further along in their journey of autism, maybe adolescence into adulthood, they always talk and say that they just want their children, number one, to be healthy, number two, happy, number three, safe. And so the safety aspect is so important. And what does that mean for each family? And then there are, in general, just some very basic things that we all need to take into consideration for our families on safety.
So let's dive into that a little bit. Healthy, happy, and safe. I think those are things that any parent would want for their child, right? And in that order, I would hope, or, in any order, I guess. But what are some things that we need to be thinking about when our kids are younger versus when they're older, right? So what are some things that 5-year-olds should be learning about safety? And then let's talk about what teenagers and young adults should be learning about safety.
Yeah, that's such a great question because it can vary. It's so individualized, but yet the same. So if you're thinking about household safety, that's usually where I start. And is the home environment in general a safe environment for the child to live in? And I've certainly been in homes where it wasn't, whether it was clean or not. Is there water, plumbing, and food? Are there fire arms in the home? And then we get to if something happens in the home, which is either going to be a fire, and we're in California, so that's always top of mind. Or if you live in the Midwest, is it going to be a tornado, or is it going to be a hurricane or a flood? But all of those emergency situations require some kind of response. And so that response then is, what is the response? And that changes from a 5-year-old to an older child, right? A little child, if you needed to exit your home, you likely could pick up the child and carry them. So having an exit plan, where to go, and a meeting spot in case people are separated. And we always say that in a family, there should be one person designated for the child with autism to ensure they get out safely into the meeting spot, if at all possible. If not, then is there a meeting spot and sort of like a neighbor tree, if you will, that are there to help look out for the child with autism. Now, if you get in the case of an older child, big young man who you can't carry out of the home, you need a completely different set of plans and strategies to get that person out of the home. And it's often, are they going to follow the command of the parent saying, get out of the home? Or if there's a device such as a fire alarm, to get out of the home. And so the needs are the same, but it has to be very individualized based on the age of the child, the size of the child, the location of the home, who's with the family.
I immediately switched into like clinician mode, and I'm thinking, what are some things we have to teach, right? We would have to teach, practicing leaving the house, hearing the fire alarm, and what do we do, and how do we respond? Right. And, it's again, you're saying the goal is get out of the house, right? The goal for a 5-year-old may be listen for mom and dad or whomever, hold their hand, leave with them, versus 22-year-old who may be hear a fire alarm or recognize something's wrong and leave, right? So we would have to teach the identifying the situation and also the response to that, right?
That's right. And I know in doing this work for so long, particularly in the event of a fire or a tornado, getting out into the safe spot is number one. And so how that child gets out will vary depending on if their bedroom's on the top floor or bottom floor. And then we also are faced with the situation. We have a lot of families who have their house completely locked down because maybe their child is a wanderer or looks unsafely from the home. And so then there needs to be considerations for that family on discrimination between you don't leave the house unless these certain things happen, and then you may leave the house to this spot. And what does that look like? So it's really in a functional analysis of the child's skills and the steps that need to happen to manage the emergency.
Yeah. What you just said kind of really put a whole different spin on it in my mind, right? My daughter sleepwalks. And so we had to put a special lock on our front door because she has walked out of our home. Okay. And so all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, I didn't even consider that, but that's an extra layer for someone, an extra barrier for someone who's trying to get out in the case of an emergency.
Exactly. So it's really complicated and super individualized, but the goal is still the same: get away from the danger to the safe location.
Right. And what conversation should parents and caregivers be having with clinicians about this? Obviously we want to bring this up before there's an emergency, before there's something significant, a fire or whatever it may be. How can they approach them and have this conversation?
That's been actually a little bit of a complicated issue. I am finding some organizations, and I know your organization does, and my organization does, have sort of a home emergency expectation list. And we put them in place, frankly, for the safety of our therapists, right? We want our therapists going into homes where they feel safe and secure. But a byproduct of that is if those tools also talk about some general safety items for family, and that comes about with sort of that initial maybe parent clinical interview about not only having a safe environment for the therapist and those expectations, but is their home safe for themselves? And do they have simple plans to manage in an emergency? I do know that I feel very strongly about that. We are trying to send that message around. I'm partnering with your organization actually at a conference coming up to try to talk to ABA providers, because a lot of providers might say that this is not in their scope of competency. And I understand that because it may likely not be. But if we start the conversation with families just around, these home expectations for both our therapists and our families, from there, we can provide resources and training to help with that scope of competency.
Right. And I think so much of it has to be planning early it's not, you never know when these things are going to happen. You never know when there's
Right.
going to be a fire or a flood, or in California, an earthquake, or any other, any other
Right.
natural disaster. And so it's, my wife was laughing at me about a year ago. I made it a point to buy, we've got 30 days worth of water and some prepackaged food. And she laughed at me, but I felt this sense of relief knowing that it's in the garage and I don't have to worry that it's just there. And hopefully I'll never need it and never use it, but it's there. And it took me, an hour or so to find everything online and order it. And then now it just fits, and I never have to stress about that piece of it.
That's excellent.
I think, I'm not trying to brag, but I think one of the things that families should consider is a little preparation can go a long way, and being able to take an hour or whatever it is and make sure that that's set up is going to alleviate us if there ever is a situation, right?
Well, that actually brings us right to the September 26th project, because that was exactly the message we were trying to say, that if on or around September 26th, if you go onto our website and follow our safety checklists, and we have 3 of them, and the first one being fire prevention, fire safety and prevention, and the second one is other general natural disasters. And the third one, in the event of a significant wandering or elopement situation. And you are exactly right. If you take 10 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour of preparation, at a minimum once a year, then you can have some peace of mind that you are likely going to be somewhat prepared.
I want to get into those, but before we get there, I don't know that everyone in our audience is familiar with the September 26th project. So can you give us a little bit of information about sort of why it came to be and the mission and purpose of the organization?
Absolutely. So you can find the website. It is literally september26.org. And it is called the September 26 Project. And it was a project that we spent a year on. There was a mom, Fada, and her son, Muhammad. And Fada was very, very active in the autism community and ABA community. She was very involved in Cal ABA, our state ABA association, very involved particularly in the stakeholder committee, which someone in your organization runs that committee, Jocelyn. And she was very, very influential in the ABA insurance law passing in California. She was one of the main advocates and lobbyists for that. And so a lot of us have her to thank for having, ABA paid for by insurances in the state of California when that passed. And so she was a tremendous force that a lot of people knew. I knew her in a periphery level, but I know a lot of folks in the ABA community and the autism community who were fiercely close to her. And her message early on was that her son, Moo, was severely impacted, and she didn't want other families to have to fight and scrape to get the things she had to do for her son. So she was a fierce advocate. Last September 26th, her home caught on fire, and it was actually the second time it had caught on fire due to an electrical issue. And Moo's bedroom was on the upstairs. And I know this from working alongside the 2 sisters. And one of the sisters was in the home with her daughter at the time. And fire broke out. They did not have working fire alarms. And so they were not alerted to the fire by that. They were alerted because the niece woke up and smelled smoke and yelled for everyone to get out of the house. They did not have a working fire extinguisher. And they did not have an exit plan or strategy. And so they all were able to get out of the house, the aunt, the niece, and Fada. But her son, Moo, whose bedroom was on the second floor, he would not leave. He wouldn't leave and follow the command to get out of the house. And so Fada, the mom, ran back into the home. And what their sister, Maysoon, who is in the home, has said is that very shortly after that, they do believe they stopped hearing Fada yell for Moo to leave. And so they do think the smoke kind of overtook them, and they burned, they passed in the fire. Yeah. And the firemen when they removed them, it took several of them to remove them because Moo was very large. And the mom, Fida, had died with her arms wrapped around her son.
Absolutely a heartbreaking story. I remember when it happened, and it was very prevalent. And again, our hearts go out to the families and everyone who knew her. And she was such an impact in our community that I'm glad that there is some positive coming from this, right? I mean, it's a horrifying story, but for this September 26th project to come because of that, I think will help more families hopefully avoid this similar situation. And there are a few things that you've mentioned that I know are on your checklist. And so I want to, your role has been to create a lot of content for this website and really provide a lot of support in the form of to-dos for families that some are quick and easy, right? Make sure there are batteries in the smoke alarms and things like that, but others are more complicated. Can you tell us a little bit about one, what it was like to create all of those checklists, and two, what you're hoping people will gain from those?
For sure. So I'll start off by saying that Fida and Moo's story is not my story to tell. I'm telling it for the purpose of the content of the website. It's definitely the family story to tell. There's a video on the website that tells the story beautifully, that is done by the sister and the niece that were in the home. And then after the tragedy happened, a bunch of us sort of regrouped and thought, what are we going to do with this? Like, this was a tragedy. This was a mom who advocated for everything for her son. But this part got missed by all of us involved. And, he was learning his name and letters and to talk. But the simple command to sort of go downstairs in the event of an emergency wasn't some skill that he possessed. And so our goal in this is that 10 minutes every September 26th can save lives. That's our tagline, that on or around September 26th, if you take 10 minutes and follow our safety checklist, and it's very clear what we're asking you to do, you go on the website, you click the fire safety checklist. And the very first thing it does tell you is, do you have working smoke alarms, fire detector alarms? There should be one on every floor. And they suggest that they be outside of a bedroom. And we did consult with many fire departments on this checklist. Two that come to mind were dads who were firefighters who had children with autism. So we did work with them to give us what they thought were like the top 5 things. And so the working fire alarms was a big one. The sooner you're alerted to a fire, the more time you have to get out of the home. The second item is then carbon monoxide detectors. There should also be one, because sometimes the smell and that will be alerted prior to something else. So getting a carbon monoxide detector on every floor, the same. Then they do suggest a fire extinguisher on every floor. Now, I will tell you, the fire department folks that I spoke to said, they prefer you to get out. They'd rather you get out than try to fight the fire yourself. But if it is a small contained fire that for some reason you determine you think you could be safe getting it out, then go ahead and use a working fire extinguisher. And but again, the state is, please get out of the house. And then they do suggest 2 exits. And so in the event of this tragedy, Moo's bedroom was on the second floor at the top of the stairs. He could not get down the stairs, but there wasn't a second exit plan, right? And that's a hard one. Now, I work with another family who's in the same position. They're 22-year-old, pretty severely impacted son. His bedroom is at the top of the stairs. We did put a situation in where there's actually a mattress that they store in their garage. They do have a fire rope. They don't know that he could climb out in the event of emergency or not, but there is a mattress. And the plan is, open the window, shove them out the window.
Right,
and that's a last resort. But this 2 exit is a great idea. And then there's something that I learned in this process that I had not known is called close the door initiative.
I saw that on the website. Tell us more.
Yeah. So it's really fascinating. Like I said, when we were putting this information together, we did reach out to experts. I'm an ABA provider. I am not a fire, expert, but we purposely went out and reached out to different people and said, what are the main things? And I can tell you, most families try to open the doors. You open the doors to try to get air. At least I think I might do that, right? So that people inside don't suffocate, but the oxygen fuels the fire. And so if you're in the event of a fire, these experts say, close as many doors as possible. So if you're trapped in a bedroom, you are more safe closing the door and putting something underneath at the bottom of the door so air can't get in. That actually could give you up to 2 or 3 more minutes of safety. Wow. So that a fire department could reach you. And that was a big
minutes can be life-changing, right? That's right. That's significant. That gives you time to get the mattress out and go out the window potentially.
Exactly. And in the event of this tragedy, the doors were all open, thinking that was, and I think I might do that too, trying to get people air and oxygen, but that actually intensified the fire.
It's such an interesting piece of science, and we won't get into it, but I know there's a link on the website. We'll make sure that that's in our show notes but very, very helpful in terms of fire. But you have other checklists as well. And so one of the other ones to talk about is the natural disaster checklist. Right. Yeah. And I think that one, there were some notes in there about food and water, which we've talked about a little bit, but also it had some interesting information that I hadn't even considered about medical supplies. What are we needing to think about when it comes to medical supplies and emergency preparedness?
That's a great question. And so I learned about that because, and I wanted to make this point, I spent several years training first responders in Orange County. It was part of a grant. I was at UCI at the time, working in the Autism and Neurodevelopmental Center, and got a grant to train first responders. And in doing that, I actually spent a lot of time training what they called CERT responders, which are the volunteer folks through the Red Cross. Those are the people on the front lines that show up in the event of a natural disaster. But what I've learned is, as much as I trained them, they trained me and said that crucial time before you get to those people that are going to help you parents still need to be prepared, which got me on this whole path of we need to prepare our families. Parents of children with autism are stressed out enough, right? And this is the last thing they're going to think about. And so we did create sort of this simple checklist about things that if you take a few minutes every year to prepare, then you are more likely to survive and be safe and reach the help you need. And one was medication, right? There are a couple ways to do that. And we share on a checklist. There are some apps that you can sort of like take a picture and download your medicines on your phone. And it is likely people are going to have their phone with them, right? And so one of the best apps I know is the American Red Cross emergency app, but there are other apps where you can just store the medical information in your phone. But they also suggest having a fireproof locked box near your medicines. In the event that you have to evacuate your home, you still have the medicines, because a lot of our kids are on, crucial medicines.
Yeah. I thought I was being sophisticated because I had, in case of emergency contact, ice in my phone. I thought I was sophisticated because of that, but not at all. I know that that's part of it, and I believe that that's part of having in your checklist as well, as making sure that you have those emergency contacts and people know the neighbors and things like that. But medications is great, and I think one thing to consider, and I'm playing through all the ideas of having medication be available, is if you're keeping some somewhere, make sure you're checking expiration dates and those types of things as well, right? So if any of you are thinking about those types of things, it's great, good planning. But also be mindful of, medications lose some of their impact as the longer they've been around and those types of things.
For sure.
I really want to talk about the third checklist which you have, which I think is so important for so many families. And I'm glad you included it because I think it's something that, again, we hear about after the fact, but not before. But I think you call it wandering prevention checklist.
I think as ABA providers, we're more likely to have this type of knowledge because it's such a prevalent sort of like behavior challenge, which fits into our scope of practice really, really well. I wanted to include it specifically, though, because when you are, and what we spoke about earlier, when you're trying to keep your home safe, but then trying to get out in emergency, those two are sort of seem like counterintuitive or counterproductive. And so we really kept that in mind when we were thinking about these things. And, we all, the statistics are out there that if a child wanders, the high probability that they're going to go to some sort of water feature is, strong. A preventative measure we have in this is, can your child swim and know how to handle themselves around water? And do you know where all of the sort of more local water areas would be, whether it's a pool, a water feature, river, lake, someone else's pool, and then knowing where those things are in a certain perimeter. And then also having, which is a little bit different than our standard sort of, keep your doors locked and have a GPS device, is actually sort of a neighborhood tree, phone tree, if you will. That's sort of the old term that shows my age. Yeah. We used to have a phone tree.
I knew exactly what you were talking about.
Thank goodness. But, and I can think of a situation where I knew a young man who wandered, and he typically was going to look for certain things he'd seen on his drive home and trying to locate them, but he didn't have the language to say what he was doing. But we sort of surmised that. And we actually worked with the family to set up a phone tree down both ends of the street. And the mom could send out a text and say, he's left the house. We think he's looking for this. And then families could be alert, look, and have checkpoints. And that saved him at least 4 or 5 times from getting out of his street into a busier street because they lived near a freeway. I know recently of a young man who got out and got onto the 55 and was hit. And he did not have a GPS tracking system. And so no one could find him. So our checklist talks about 1, locking and keeping home secure. 2, knowing the water features. 3, neighborhood phone trees, which is hard for our parents. A lot of times our parents don't want to disclose information, but in the event of a child that might wander, there's potential. I think it's super important and it can be a really quick way. And then a GPS or tracking device.
Great. Kelly, I want to ask you real quick, for those in our audience who don't know, can you describe a phone tree for us?
Sure. There is a visual on the website where it sort of starts with like 1 point of contact, and then there's 2 points of contact, and those 2 people call 2 more people, and those 2 people call 2 more people, or text, or Snapchat, or whatever social media folks are doing today. But the idea was that the parent can have 1 to 2 people that will continue on the message while they can stay focused on trying to locate their child.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that I think is really important is making sure that, the individuals that we're working with and families get opportunities to meet first responders and to meet, whether it be, local fire department or police department or whatever it may be. Is there a way to do that? Is there a way that they can go and so that, individuals with autism can feel more comfortable with those people as they're trying to help them?
Absolutely. Now, every specialist I spoke to, and I can't speak for every single city or town, but we asked a lot of them, and they all said, both law enforcement and fire responders all said they want to know who the kids are and adults in their community that might need additional help. They want the kids and adults to come to the precinct, go to the fire station, meet the people. For parents, they don't have a registry. So I'm going to say register, but they don't mean register, but give them the information about the child. Maybe they're nonverbal. maybe certain things that might help calm them down, or if they were wandering, what is something that might entice them to the police officer. They want them to meet the fire department and police officers to know they're there to help and not scare or hurt. They want to know that information and also calming techniques and communication style. And so we certainly training first responders is crucial, but the individualness of each child is also super helpful to sort of register, if you will, with them. And I've also learned that if you are in need of resources such as fire alarm or fire extinguishers, those organizations, your local level, can help get them for you if you can't afford them.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
I used to work with a family, and they would make cookies for the local fire department. And, their son, he would very often run out of their home. And they would go to the fire department and they would bring cookies, and they would sit down and have cookies with the fire, the fire team and their son. And it was helpful because the son got to meet everyone and was familiar and all. And thankfully they never needed to use the emergency response services during the time that I knew them. But the whole goal was for them to be prepared and for him to feel comfortable with the local team, and for the local team to have some understanding of him, so that if there ever was a need, that they could get him that help. And I think things like that are really what you're describing. It's take some time, spend a little time getting to know people, driving by, stopping in, saying hello. That's going to go a long way in those situations.
That's such a great idea. I hadn't thought of that. I'm going to pass that on. I love it.
Yeah, I don't know what the rules are these days with bringing cookies or not. I don't know, but look, for me, any excuse to have cookies is a good one. And this is a positive way for us to be, again, being intentional in our prevention. I think that's really what it is. I also saw on there, and there was medical bracelets, medical IDs. Are those things you would recommend for individuals?
Yeah, that's such it's such an individualized preference. I certainly have known many children who wouldn't wear something like that, but our technology is so much better now. Some children, and they make them looking like they can almost look like an Apple Watch or a smartwatch. They have some very sophisticated ones. They even have some that you can sew a QR code into clothing. There's one where you can put an insert in a shoe or on the shoelace. And so you can even do a temporary tattoo. So it really depends. I have found it's like very unique and individualized for each child and what they'll tolerate. But we were able to find quite a huge list that people, some were free and some cost some money. And most of them had some form of technology involved. But GPSs have saved a number of children that I've known.
Yeah. Kelly, I think the number one thing I'm hearing from you is, 10 minutes on or around September 26th is really, it's really the thing that I think is going to stick in my brain of, check the batteries, make sure the medications are up to date, make sure you've got, medical IDs and all those things are up to date. Is there anything we didn't cover that we should know about?
I think you covered it all. The website is up. There are printable checklists. If people, they're right there. You just click and see if you want to print it and have a piece of paper. We also list under each one resources to find things that you need. And then we are planning on every September 26th, asking organizations to put out the word that this is the time of year again to make sure you're prepared.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for bringing this to families and making sure that they're taking those few minutes. Hopefully everyone is hearing this and will make a few adjustments and they'll never need to hear about emergency services. But we really appreciate the work that you're doing and the time you spent making this happen for people. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I know some of the stories that were shared during this week's episode are a little bit heartbreaking and bring up a lot of different emotions for us. But I hope that your takeaway from this is that you'll feel inspired and recommitted to making sure that your family and the families that you work with are ultimately putting safety at the forefront of their mind. I think safety needs to be a priority for all of us, and I'm recommitting myself to make sure that my family and my home are as safe as possible. And I plan on spending 10 minutes every September 26th checking batteries and checking fire extinguishers and doing all those things. And also, please check our show notes for more links to more information about the September 26th project and all the other things that we discussed. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. As always, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Autism Therapies. And if you have a show suggestion or other feedback, please send us an email at allautismtalk@learnbehavioral.com. Until next time, take care, be safe.
We hope you've enjoyed today's episode of All Autism Talk. This podcast is brought to you by Learn Behavioral, the leading network of providers serving children with autism and other special needs. Visit us at learnbehavioral.com. Listen to previous episodes at allautismtalk.com, on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. All Autism Talk, connecting the autism community one podcast at a time.